Micron ultimately is kind of beholden to economic cyclicality. This is a very cyclical business in the types of chips that they make here. Where are we in that cycle?
Well, so we've seen negative revisions of almost 50% on the top line for Micron, and right now they're writing down a lot of the inventory. I would say, given we've seen a sequential increase in this quarter, so far it was sequentially dropping the top line, it's probably a sign of a trough. And then, the generative AI driver, so far it was more towards, the data center exposed chip makers.
Right.
You will see that trickle down to, the memory makers, although I would say...
How so? I don't know.
So think of it this way. When you are enhancing the, the processing power of the chip, you also need a lot more memory. And there are the interconnects and, the bandwidth requirements when it comes to some of these chips. And, what NVIDIA has done is obviously they've integrated everything in terms of the end product that they're offering to the hyperscalers. But everyone needs memory, and there are only 3 players. Question is, are they coordinating to a point where the pricing gets better? Because so far, what you could see is volumes have been growing, but the pricing has been going down because the demand just wasn't there on the PC side.
Yeah.
The mobile side was still holding off fairly well. Autos, I think, will remain a driver, and that you can see that in the results, that autos continues to be resilient.
But to your point on that, I mean, gross margins in the fiscal third quarter, awful, and their forecast for gross margins in the fiscal fourth quarter, awful.
Because they're writing down a lot of the existing inventory, and that's very typical of a memory cycle. Probably the decline in gross margins is more pronounced this time around, given, what we are dealing with. But I don't think it's that different from the prior cycles.
There's been a lot of discussion today here about the idea of restricting, I guess, the flow of chips, and more importantly, that chip technology. The U.S. obviously trying to restrict it outbound to China, but China's also doing its own probe, a cybersecurity probe, into Micron here. Micron did comment on it today, saying that the recent decision by China is, quote, a significant headwind.
Yeah, so look, I think anytime you lose a big market, which is the case, with Micron's exposure to China, and you can see Micron is probably more exposed than NVIDIA because China probably has some local options in the case of memory makers, or they could source it from Samsung or SK Hynix. So clearly with chip makers, there is no alternative to NVIDIA GPU right now. But when it comes to memory, there are alternatives, and that's where Micron does have the risk of losing a lot of the China sales. But these companies have figured out a way to get around the sanctions, and I'm sure they're trying their best in terms of how to navigate this current environment.